You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
All right, I want to thank you all for making it to Spiceland and welcome you. I'm Jeremiah Morrill. I'm the vice chairman of the Henry County Libertarian Party, and I guess by default we're the hosts of the event since we're in Henry County. So I guess I'm MC as much as anybody else. So the plan for today is we're going to go ahead, listen to our speaker. I was able to recruit Sean Rao to come in today. He's an attorney from Upland, Indiana. He's attended Taylor University. I assume he graduated. It says attended. We won't put him on the... the next sentence says he received his BA in philosophy. And then he attended Ohio University. He received his MA in philosophy and attended the Indiana University Robert McKinney School of Law. So he is an attorney here in town. Passed the bar in 2012, and he's been practicing at Galyen Row Law Office as well as the Henry County Public Defender's Office. Specializes in criminal defense. He's a resident of Newcastle with his wife Sara, his kids Sullivan and Savannah, and a dog named Wrigley. Sean says that Ron Paul awoke him from his dogmatic slumber back in 2007. That's his bio in a nutshell. He considers himself to be liberty-minded, conservative, which is okay with most of us in the room. We're not going to run you out with the sticks. We're thankful to have you. And if we can agree on stuff 75 or 80% of the time, I think we're all friends here. So with that, we're going to welcome Sean. Spend about 10, 15 minutes with him. He'll give a little talk. We'll have some time for question and answer, so save some of those up. We'll talk about that. And then we'll get to the food, and then each county will have some time to do business. And then at the end, the little cherry on the dessert, we'll hear from the two candidates for state chair. So with that, we'll welcome Sean up here, and go from there.
My name's Sean Rao. I live and work in Newcastle. Like Jeremiah said, I practice privately at Galyen Row Law Office, and I do major felonies out of the Henry County Public Defender's Office, mainly handling major felonies out of Circuit Court 1, so anything from murder down to manufacturing methamphetamine cases. Those types of cases are the ones that I receive. So I have a pretty wide swath of cases I take care of. And Jeremiah asked, what would you feel comfortable talking about? I said, I'll just talk about what I know, which is the justice system and how that works and how that plays out here. So what's really attractive to me as someone who's liberty-minded is that defense work is where constitutional rubber meets the road. So we can talk about our constitutional principles like the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, those types of things. But where reality sets in is in the judicial system. So if someone's accused of something and perhaps the state does something that is unconstitutional, I'm the person on the front line that gets to fight that fight. And I take a lot of enjoyment out of that. I take a lot of, it's an honor to have that sort of profession, to be the agent for your client who may have had their constitutional rights violated. So that to me in a nutshell is why it's important for liberty-minded people to get involved with the judicial system, particularly in criminal defense. And I get to work on constitutional law every day. So a lot of my colleagues in law school had a lot of high-minded ideas and things like that. But defense attorneys are the ones that are in the trenches fighting for your constitutional rights, to protect your constitutional rights. There's great attorneys that do First Amendment work, Second Amendment work, but on a day-to-day basis, your criminal defense attorney, your public defender, is the person that's trying to defend constitutional rights in your community. And that's important because this is an adversarial system that we're talking about. It's sort of an us versus them, and I know that libertarians, liberty-minded people sort of enjoy that challenge, enjoy the challenge of the full weight of the state going against your client, being able to step in their shoes and say, there's something going on here. We need to take a step back and take a look at whether in fact what was accused actually happened and whether there were people's rights that were violated. One of the great things about our system is that in criminal defense is that juries are ultimately the decider of the facts and the law. So that the state of Indiana can throw all these really awful, terrible accusations against people, And ultimately, 12 people need to say unanimously that that person did it. And there's something that's very assuring about that. There's some things that are very, I think, appropriate about that, because in other countries you would have maybe one judge or a panel of judges deciding someone's fate. Somebody that's paid by the state and someone that's kind of has that influence and that sort of political interest to push for convictions and try to get the bad guys and things like that. But ultimately, 12 people in your county can decide what happens in a criminal case. And that's very assuring. And that's something that, people talk about jury duty as, I got to miss work. And it is a burden to some degree. It's critically important that people like yourselves, or people that are your friends, your family, your neighbors, these people need to be the ones serving on these juries. We don't need to kind of pass the baton on to someone else to take care of this. This is something that's a civic duty. This is something that ensures people's constitutional rights. But in the end, a lot of what I do is negotiate. And so when we're negotiating cases or criminal cases, whether it's murder or something that's a misdemeanor, we're looking at what's a fair outcome. And people ask me, a lot of times, if I'm at a party and people are a couple drinks in, they'll say, how do you defend those people? How do you defend these terrible criminals? The bottom line is, if you look statistically, in state court, 94% of all state cases in the state of Indiana or any state end in a plea agreement. So it's someone that is saying, I did something wrong, whether it's what I'm charged with or some lesser included offense or some other count. 97% in federal court. So 97% of the time to 94% of the time, these people are pleading guilty. And my job is to make sure that there's a fair outcome, that even at perhaps a contested sentencing hearing, that person is entitled to a fair defense. That person is entitled to show the judge, if we're contesting what the sentence should be, that there are these mitigating factors. These are the circumstances that maybe led to this. Maybe this person has had this lifelong drug habit, broke into somebody's garage, something like that. We can show the court that maybe there are mitigating circumstances that they should take into account. And one of the things that we often think about is that, as to that sort of argument, how can you defend those people? It's just like with First Amendment law. We don't need the First Amendment to talk about the weather. We don't need the First Amendment to talk about the basketball game last night. We need the First Amendment to protect what is unpopular, what the majority does not like. And likewise, that's why we need the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. Most people, by and large, will not rely on these things, perhaps ever in their lives. But the key is to make sure that you, in every case, fight just as hard for that person, regardless of what they're accused of doing. And by ensuring their constitutional rights, you ensure the safety for society at large from unconstitutional overreaches by the state. And strangely enough, a lot of my clients, they're just one accusation away from being put back in jail, having additional charges filed against them, and that's all it is. So that's why it's so critically important to do good criminal defense work, to have a strong criminal defense bar in your community. One of the things when I thought about preparing for this was, where have libertarians made inroads with society at large? And so what I would suggest is, from my perspective, the most important thing that libertarians have influenced over the past 10 to 15 years is the issue of mass incarceration. This is something that I think libertarians were at the tip of the spear at the beginning of perhaps mid-'90s, early 2000s. Now you see Democrats, Republicans taking these libertarian ideas on for different reasons. For example, Republicans are worried about cost. They're worried about the cost of the taxpayer to house nonviolent individuals. Democrats are more worried about different notions of social justice and things like that. It doesn't really matter what your motivations are, so long as you know that that's the problem. Somebody like Bradley Balco, who I read somewhat frequently, he talks about mass incarceration quite a bit. So these ideas have permeated our society and legislature. And the state of Indiana, fortunately, has taken steps to address that. In relation to, when we're talking about mass incarceration, we're not talking about we need to let violent offenders out. We need to let murderers or burglars or people that cause real problems. We're talking about people that are accused or convicted of non-violent drug offenses, because those are the people that are warehousing, and these are the people that aren't necessarily a danger to their community, and it's not being treated as a medical issue or an addiction issue. It's something that's being treated as a crime issue. So what the state of Indiana has done is passed different laws with this new, totally revamped criminal code, in that so for example, if you have a prior felony, prior to the revamped system, if you were accused or you were convicted of a Class B Class B felony dealing in a narcotic drug, you'd be serving a mandatory minimum of 10 years, regardless. If you're talking about a felony, if you're within 1,000 feet or so of a school or something along those lines, you're talking 20 years. Okay, so the state of Indiana kind of realized, hey, we've got way too many things going on, and so they did two things, in my perspective. They changed the code to make all drug felonies fully suspendable, regardless of what someone's criminal history is, because there are so many facts and circumstances that lead somebody to take different actions that I think that the courts are given a lot more decision-making power, which I think is a positive thing. I think you want judges in your community making these judgments. Second of all, the state has introduced different therapeutic ways of addressing things. So you have, I don't know if people in here have heard purposeful incarceration or therapeutic communities in the Department of Corrections. So say the offender has to go to DOC after they've been convicted of a drug offense. You can put them in a therapeutic community where they're getting treatment and counseling, things like that, and then maybe the judge says, I'm going to give you, we got a stick and a carrot. Carrot is maybe you can modify your sentence and get out of prison if you do your drug treatment. It is unfortunate that so many people have to get to that point, but at least the state is acknowledging that nonviolent drug offenses are a serious problem. But they're still a problem that we need to address as a treatment issue rather than a full-fledged criminal justice issue. Now, the federal system is a lot different. Judges, oftentimes, their hands are tied. So they have to follow through with it just because Congress has passed the laws that require them to issue mandatory minimums based on criminal history or based on an amount of the drug or whatever the case may be. So Indiana, I think, is more on the cutting edge, and I think that people like yourselves have influenced both sides to make this a priority. Further, Indiana has some issues going forward with that as well. So now, for example, level 6 felonies, they used to be Class D felonies. So you're talking basic possession, maintaining common nuisance, these types of lower-level drug-related felonies. The DOC won't take these people. So now our county prison or our county jails are getting overcrowded, including in Henry County. So that's kind of the downside of what the state has done, and from my perspective, in that they've kind of passed the buck onto the counties. And something needs to be done about that, I think. And we need to figure out whether we want to go towards more community-based things like work release or home detention or something along those lines, or whatever the case may be. But I always make the argument in every nonviolent drug offense, we don't need to warehouse people. We need to treat this as a public health issue. We need to get people into treatment. We need to get these people into where they need to be so that they can be successful. Because if you just house somebody in a jail cell for 5 years, you let them out, and you think things are going to be better, it's just empirically wrong. I mean, it's just not, there's nothing there. You need to have treatment components and things like that, and more of a compassionate look at these things. So I think, kind of in closing, from my perspective, libertarian principles are all through what I do in criminal defense, and it should be something that I can, in an adversarial system where I'm advocating for my client versus the state of Indiana, I should be able to push for these principles. Keeping the state within the confines of the Constitution. I tell the juries, you are the check on overreach, and use that. Juries can decide the facts and the law in the state of Indiana under the Indiana Constitution. Every jury trial I go to, I'm going to ask for that final instruction that states what the Constitution says. They are the judges of facts and law. And that's very important because you want to empower people, because people think, well, I'm just a normal person, I'm just, auto mechanic or stay-at-home mom or whatever the case may be. You have all the power in this system. Don't forget that. So you want to empower people. And I encourage you to do that. When maybe you have a friend that says, I got jury trial, I got to go be a juror, I want to do that. Kind of remind them that, ultimately if it was somebody that you knew whose life was on the line, maybe you'd want somebody that's careful and that's deliberate and that can think these things through and won't just go along with whatever the state says. But most importantly, I want you guys to come out of here knowing that you guys have influence on both parties. Not just your own, but the Republicans and the Democrats. Because they're picking up on these issues that libertarians have been talking about for years. People are listening. Because reality is starting to set in that we can't just house everybody and anybody just because they dealt a pill of hydrocodone in their own house, set up by a state CI that had to work off their own drug problem. We can't put all these people in prison. And I know libertarians have been on that for a long time. So I just want to empower you guys. I want to encourage you guys that, there is progress being made. I see it on the front line because I'm kind of the frontline soldier on some of these things. But it's coming through. And just keep up what you're doing. Keep up the good work because it's important. It's important work. And if anybody has any questions about justice system or criminal defense or anything, I'd be happy to answer. Yeah.
I've actually heard a lot about the ramifications of closing on, back in the day, closing on mental hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
How much in your work, especially with drug offenses, can you attribute to just mental illness that is just going through?
That's a really good question because I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so it's really difficult for me to see that. And the effects of a drug like methamphetamine can mask or can appear to be schizophrenia or depression or whatever the case may be. So often you have drug habit, mental health issue hand in hand. Like it's just they're so interwoven. It's very difficult to untangle that. But they're absolute. Like if I had to put a number on it, I'd probably say 75-80% of my clients deal with some form of mental health issue, whether it's depression, anxiety, or something more serious, schizophrenia. Absolutely. Yeah, they'll think, well, the methamphetamine will help me or the heroin will help me, and it just exacerbates the problem. So, yes.
You mentioned 94 to 97%.
Yeah.
You mentioned that young jurors have the right to decide on the living law. You think if we push more, make more people aware of the jury qualification, we would cut down on some of these police lines? Is that understood that there's jury qualification to make this not really remove good trial, counting on the fact that they would be fine? How do you see jury qualification acting?
I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, I think I tried one case probably 2 or 3 years ago where battery against a law enforcement officer. I mean, it was on video. It was pretty clear. But there were procedures that the law enforcement officer didn't follow. So they found him not guilty on the more serious ones, then found him guilty of a lesser included. So I think that sort of jury saying, this isn't right, what you did wasn't right, we're going to kind of split it in half. So I've seen that in my practice, but I mean, in terms of widespread jury nullification, as a defense attorney, it's kind of hard to bank on that, just because when I get a for example, if I'm going to jury trial in a month, I'm going to get a sheet of about 65 names or so. And these are the people that are going to make up the different panels that I'm selecting from, that I need to get 12 out of. It's very hard for me. It's in some ways it's kind of luck of the draw, but it'd be hard for me to bank on jury nullification as like a strategy for me. But yeah. Yes. Like the one instruction I always want in my final jury instruction, the final jury instruction goes back there with them in the room. I can't go back there, the state can't go back there, but that can. And that just is the text of the Indiana Constitution saying that jurors are the judges of the facts and the law. And while they'll also say you can't totally disregard the law, you still have to find how these facts apply to it and carry that out. So that's as close as I can get. Because anything more is going to be, the state's going to object and I'm not going to get it in. So, yeah.
How often do you see civil asset forfeiture in your practice, and are we making evidence to stop that?
I see it quite a bit. Like, for example, I get a lot of cases off of 70. So the PACE team. PACE team is a group from Wayne County, I think Hancock County and Henry County, that kind of work together, get federal funding to effectuate traffic stops to stop drug trafficking through 70, because it's a big corridor between the East Coast and then maybe Chicago or even down in Texas or different places. The civil asset forfeiture that I see, I'm trying to think of some specific recent things that I've seen, but it's hard to fight, because usually if my client's charged with, for example, like a level 3 drug trafficking or drug dealing case, they're usually incarcerated, so they don't really have the means to fight that case. They don't get the right to a civil attorney, even though they're getting their stuff taken without being convicted. So that's the real challenge for it's usually indigent people that are getting, in our area, at least from what I've seen, it's indigent people that are getting cars or cash seized or whatever else. The real challenge is the fact that they don't have counsel on that case. And I can advise them a little bit on something like that, but I don't do civil work. So I tend to stay away from things I don't know about, but I do give them at least somewhere to start. But until we get like a civil Galyen passed where people in civil cases are entitled to an attorney, which I don't think is going to happen. Realistically, it's not going to happen anytime soon in Indiana. But I think it should be something that we would consider in Indiana. Till that happens, then it's still going to be an uphill battle.
That PACE team really has generated interest locally here.
Yes. Yeah, with the way some of the money has went or not went, that's part of the problem when you have multi-jurisdictional people and not really one in charge, I suppose. I don't know a lot about that controversy other than what I've read in the newspaper. So,
is there anything we can do as like private citizens or even as a political party to help protect against that kind of stuff?
That's a good question. I don't know. Just make it more of a known issue. I suppose that in our county, I've read a lot about this. I've seen it be a lot more egregiously abused in different places, different states, things like that. The issue you're going to run into is that it's hard to get people to be compassionate for indigent criminal defendants. It's hard for me to go to a party and people think that, oh man, what you do is really important to society, which I think it is. But at the same time, it's hard to generate that sort of popular support, because I'd say by and large the people that do have assets forfeited through civil asset forfeiture are indigent and they are in jail. And usually they won't even know, A, that it's happening, or B, what to do about it. So, yes, sir. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. It seems like it, right? It seems like they want to keep it at a certain level, just so they can keep the money going, I guess. But right now, what I see is there's a big shift of I suppose obligation onto the counties now, so that they want to come out to the taxpayers of the state of Indiana and say, we've saved all this money. Really what you've done is you pass the expense on to the county. So the county's stuck with the bill. So that's what I see more of as a trend, at least in our state going forward, in terms of incarceration issues. That's the big question for me. What do we do with all these level 6 people for maintaining common nuisance that they can't bond out, they can't hire their own attorney, they can't dispose of these cases quickly. So they're sitting in jail for, 45, 60 days. They're losing jobs, they're losing, apartments or wherever they live, they're losing cars, and then they come out on the other end and they're just in a worse position. So
the home detention is, I've talked to some people in our county, I think they expect me to pay for that as well, as a defendant, that's 4, 5, 600 dollars a month.
that's correct.
When you don't have a job.
Yes. Now, the thing is, though, I will say this about our local community. If someone not being able to pay is not going to be a basis for them to be disqualified or removed from the program, I here locally, other places it would be. I mean, they would say, you can't pay for your home detention, you're going back in jail. We are really blessed here in Henry County with good judges and good probation officers and a lot of good people that I get to work with on a day-to-day basis, where they will become somewhat compassionate. They'll say, look, just because they don't have a place to live doesn't mean they need to be in jail. We've hit a point locally where we're out of space. I mean, there's just no other place to put people. Judges know that, prosecutors know that, cops know that, probation officers know that. So we got to come up with more creative solutions in order to address these problems. And people do need to be supervised, but it doesn't mean that it has to be in the jail. Yeah. It's a hard question. It's hard to gain traction in like a prosecutor race or a race to become judge as a third party. I mean, I'm sure is with anything else, but that would be the challenge, I suppose. Would be how do you gain support for somebody like that, unless there's some crisis or something where you can come in and say, left and right aren't working. Let's try this third way. Yes, yeah. It's hard to get a third party support. I mean, county government is heavily Republican. I mean, that's not I'm not breaking news out here, but it's a Republican county, so it's hard to break that. And it's hard to get anywhere without being a Republican in county government. To be honest, I mean, it's just hard to break in. Yeah, a county. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes. You had a question in the minute. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you guys. Appreciate you having me.